Well, hello. Welcome. My name is Mark Schneider. I'm a product manager here at SAS, whose main responsibility is SAS Viya, which is why I'm coming today to talk to you a bit about how one migrates from SAS version 9 to SAS Viya. I have a lot of domain expertise in general areas of architecture and deployment and administration, but today we're going to focus on the activities related to moving your version 9 environments over into the Viya world. Before I do that, though, it's always important to pause and say, well, why am I going to SAS Viya in the first place? And there are a lot of key motivating factors. I'm not going to belabor them, but I'm going to reiterate a few of the most important ones. They're driving people to adopt SAS Viya technology. First is SAS Viya's capability to speak in your language of choice, whether it's Python or R or Java or Lua, being able to do analytics, data science type features in a language with which I'm familiar. Then, of course, SAS Viya does bring to it advanced analytics that are not present in the version 9 environment. So doing some of that deep learning, some of the latest and greatest technologies that is unique on the SAS Viya side. Another motivator for people moving to Viya is speed itself. SAS Viya is based on a distributed in-memory engine, the CAS server. We'll talk a bit about that in a second. And people are taking the analytic problems of largest size and trying to do those in an efficient fashion. Of course, many people are moving to the cloud. A lot of the customers are adopting cloud technologies, and Viya was architected with the cloud in mind. And over time, more and more, Viya is integrated closer and closer with both public and private cloud providers. High availability, that's a key. No single points of failure in the SAS Viya architecture. If any one component drops out, I've got a copy of that component that's ready to pick up the slack and make sure that there's no incurred downtime. And then we talk about democratization of the analytics, and that's just a big flowery term for analytics for everybody, whether you're a trade data scientist or whether you're an end business user who has no knowledge of programming languages, but still can use user interfaces which are adapted to allow them to do advanced analytics, high forecasting types of functions. And this basically, SAS Viya encapsulates the entire analytics lifecycle. We talk about going from data input, data manipulation, all the way to deriving business value from making the right business decision. So these are all motivators for why you'd move to Viya. Now let's talk a little bit about how you accomplish that. Most of the people who are adopting SAS Viya today already have a SAS version 9 footprint. And so they're seeing over time this need to adopt more and more of Viya's capabilities and rely less and less on version 9 capabilities in the process. Now, when we talk about adopting Viya, it essentially incorporates three different phases. And actually, most of the customers that I speak to who are adopting Viya are going through each of these three phases. And SAS, along the way, is enhancing each of these phases to make it easier and easier. The first phase that I'm going to discuss is interoperability. And this one I would say SAS supports completely. The ability to use version 9 clients to communicate directly with that SAS Viya server, the CAS server, to do that distributed in-memory processing there. We'll talk a bit about how we accomplish that. The next phase of migration that you could choose to adopt is content promotion. And this essentially means if I have a SAS version 9 environment stood up next to a SAS Viya environment, being able to move content. When I talk about content, this is user-created collateral. These are the reports and views and jobs and pipelines that you've created on the version 9 side, and to export them and import them into the Viya side so that I could use them in native Viya fashion, and not just use them, but to edit them and use them there. And then the final phase that I'll discuss is replacement. And this is kind of the nirvana when it comes to migration. This is, I have moved all of my SAS workloads over to SAS Viya, and now I can turn off the lights on my version 9 environment, no longer requiring sort of this dual head having to maintain both a version 9 and a Viya architecture environment. So let me take each of these three separately, and we'll start with the interoperability first. So as I mentioned, we've already got this covered. SAS has done a great deal of work in order to make sure that version 9 clients communicate well with SAS Viya servers. So if you're familiar with our standard version 9 clients like Enterprise Guide and Data Integration Studio and Enterprise Miner, these clients actually generate SAS code, either explicitly or behind the scenes. But your good old standard SAS Foundation data step and procedure code, which then is executed using a Foundation server in version 9. Well, what we've done as of the 5th maintenance release of 9.4, which actually came out over a year and a half ago, we're already on the 6th maintenance release right now. But as of at least the 5th maintenance release, all of these clients were VIA enabled. And what that means is that they can generate and leverage procedure code that can only be executed in a VIA CAS server. And the way that's handled is the clients actually do their data step and procedure submission into a 9.4.M5 server like a Workspace server. And then the Workspace server actually sees that, well, I don't know about this particular procedure. This is a VIA procedure. I need to farm that out to the CAS server in my VIA environment and have it execute in that highly performant distributed fashion there and have the results fed back then to my client. Or similarly, the data step itself is something that has been VIA enabled. And so if you're using, for example, data sources that are available to SAS VIA, the data step itself can be distributed over on the CAS server. So on the version 9 side, I've got sort of this middleman of the Workspace server or stored process server or any Foundation server that's processing the data step and the procedure code and farming out what it can to CAS server to take advantage of the faster, higher performant analytics over in the VIA environment. A lot of good interoperability, and that's available to you today. The next thing you talk about interoperability, though, it's not just about the clients, but the data themselves and what they're accessing. And in many cases, data can be accessed both from your version 9 environment and your SAS VIA environment without the need to replicate the data. So you see on the slide, the lower portion of the slide talks about different data types. Obviously, the SAS7 BDAT format, that's your simple SAS data set format. And VIA speaks data set format as well as version 9, obviously. They both can read in the same CSV files. They both communicate with Hadoop well. They both can access third-party databases like Oracle and DB2, Teradata, et cetera. There are a lot of different ways for you to load that data into a CAS server in order to make it available for VIA-based processing. You can, of course, use those SAS 9 clients that I just talked about on the previous slide that support that interoperability in using CAS library steps in order to set up those libraries which point to the data that was previously only accessible on version 9. You could obviously also use VIA clients themselves like SAS Studio to pull data in and make it accessible to the CAS server. You certainly can write batch jobs and schedule them either on the version 9 side or on the VIA side to pull that data into the CAS server memory. And interestingly enough, if you're a visual analytics user, for example, you're already familiar with the SAS Laser server, which is its version 9 in-memory distributed server. We can actually point CAS libraries directly to Laser libraries. So there's no need for you to replicate that data somewhere else, exporting it out of Laser, but I can actually directly access the exact same data as it exists in your version 9 Laser environment. So Visual Analytics, for example, on the VIA side, can now look at the same data Visual Analytics on the version 9. Version 9 and VIA can share that same data. And then SAS Connect actually precedes the 5th maintenance version of 9.4 in allowing data and processing actually to go back and forth between version 9 and VIA. Now, I should point out just before I leave the slide, there are some data characteristics that are unique to VIA. Certainly that in-memory distributed processing that we have right now, the approach that we're taking with the CAS server is unique to SAS VIA, as well as some different data formats, columnar data formats, which are especially efficient when we're talking about analytics processing, things like Parquet and ORC. Those are uniquely supported on the VIA side. So there's not interoperability there because version 9 doesn't support it. But for what version 9 does support, we have a lot of different avenues to pull the data in on VIA. So enough about interoperability. Let's move on to the second phase of migration that I talked about earlier, and that's content promotion. I have a lot of user-created collateral that I want to move over from version 9 to SAS Viya. And those of you who are familiar with version 9 administrative tools, you probably already know about SAS Management Console and the way in which you can package up version 9 content and move it from one version 9 environment to another version 9 environment. Well, thankfully, the process for content promotion is very similar when I'm trying to move that content to SAS Viya. I can use SAS Management Console. I can create similar SPK files, which is the SAS packaging format that it produces in wrapping up all those reports and jobs, et cetera, to make them available for another environment. Now, what Viya adds to the mix, though, is this mapping file that you see on the slide. So we have a transfer utility which actually looks at the package and says, okay, I see the different object types here. I need a little bit more information in order to map, for example, those SAS version 9 libraries to the Viya CAS libraries. And so the mapping file is produced with documentation and allowing you to edit it directly to provide the additional mapping information in order to accomplish that content promotion across version 9 to Viya's approaches. So once I've edited the mapping file, I've got my package file, those two things together are used and input into the import process, which is SAS Viya's transfer service, which imports it and makes it therefore available in your target Viya environment. Now, before I hop off this process, it's important for you to take into consideration the order of operation that you perform this promotion. Because when I'm moving from version 9 to Viya, I don't typically do that holistically. I don't typically take my whole version 9 environment, create one big honking package, and then import that whole package into Viya, and then I'm done. Rather, I typically break things down by department, by workload, et cetera, doing it piecemeal. Well, for each of those pieces that I choose to do, I need to do it in a certain order. First of all, I should create packages which contain the security and identity information first. So then once I've exported those into my package, done my mapping, and then imported it into Viya, then I move on to library definitions. Mapping live name statements on the version 9, library definitions and metadata on the version 9 side to CAS libs on the Viya side. And then I do the same thing with my data tables. And then last, but certainly not least, is I create promotion packages which contain my reports and all the goodness, all that collateral I created on the version 9 side, which depend on those previous 3 steps. So doing those in order, very, very important. Now, SAS has provided a utility called the Content Assessment Tool to assist with the process of determining what you have available on the version 9 side in determining what needs to be promoted on the Viya side. And so you engage your SAS account representative in order to gain access to this utility. Again, it's the Content Assessment Tool. The account rep will make that available for download to you, and then it runs on your local site, gleaning information from your metadata server to get all the different objects that you've defined. And you can actually, it produces a report then you can view, and you can see this is an example of a top-level report that has resulted from one run of that content assessment tool on one specific environment. There's a lot of detail in this report. I'm not going to run through every aspect of it, but you can see here, as a quick synopsis of all the different object types, the data tables and the libraries, the OLAP cubes, the number of server contexts. Those are all called out here. And it's a drillable report. So you see tabs across the top, and you also see links within the report itself, so I can get more and more information on this. And here's an example of drilling into the OLAP information. So this gives me a better feel of the types of OLAP cubes that are being built on the version 9 side. Now, SAS Viya itself does not have an OLAP server, but it does have methods by which OLAP cubes and the reports that are produced from those OLAP cubes can be manifested into visual analytics reports. And so having an understanding of the types of cubes and how those should convey onto the Viya side is important. So I see this detail report, which helps me with that process. The same thing with Enterprise Miner. I need to have a handle on all those different pipelines and sequences that I've created within Enterprise Miner. This at a glance shows me everything that was gleaned out of metadata to see, in this particular version 9 environment, what I need to carry forward with me. Now, full disclosure, not every pipeline sequence is currently supported in SAS Viya yet. And so this, again, informs me on what I'm currently using and better prepares me for what is and isn't compatible on the SAS Viya side. So I've talked about interoperability, both of the clients and the data. I've talked about content promotion, how I get that SAS version 9 content and user-created collateral into a SAS Viya environment. And the last phase of migration is replacement. This is what I call the nirvana. This is I want to turn off my version 9 environment and just live in the SAS Viya world. There are 4 key considerations when you consider that prospect. And the first and foremost is functional replacement value. I just talked about Enterprise Miner and how not all of those pipeline sequences are available for support in Viya. So I need to ensure that as I'm moving workloads to SAS Viya, all the business value that I've been using on the version 9 side is available for me on Viya. So I can I can work with my account rep to see the different products which are available on SAS Viya and the features that they offer. And in many cases, Visual Analytics is the poster child. We've got full replacement value. It's a no-brainer. It's easy. Full functional replacement value. I can turn off my VA on 9.4 and move everything over to Viya. So that's the first consideration, but there are 3 others. I've got to consider capacity. So certainly SAS has created system requirements documentation to help assist you with determining how much muscle, how much CPU and memory and I/O are required for your destination Viya environment. So I need to ensure that I've got the horsepower in order to support that before obviously I move my workloads to it. And SAS has its Enterprise Excellence Center, which can help you with determining those capacity parameters. Third is the data access, right? Analytics is only as good as the data that you can get to. If you're going to turn off your version 9 environment, you better be sure that your SAS Viya servers have access to the same data or that business critical data that is going to drive your whole analytics lifecycle and those decisions at the tail end. So in many cases, as I talked about on the interoperability slide, SAS Viya does have great access methods. In fact, all those access engines that work in the MVA world, well, those access engines, in many cases, work, on the Viya world in the same way. But the Viya actually brings to the table a lot of additional efficiencies, for additional access methods, certainly parallelized access. But I do need to have intranet access to those data sources, right? So in my SAS Viya environment, as I'm standing it up, I need to make sure that my servers can actually connect to those third-party databases or those file servers which host the data that I'm pulling in. So that's data access. And then the 4th consideration is just your users. Are they ready for this change? Yes, SAS Viya brings with it a great new, industry standard, modern HTML5 look and feel, but changes change, and a lot of users need to sort of be eased into, turning their heads around and seeing, a new interface of that ilk. And so educating those users, ensuring that you're phasing in those new interfaces is important as you're considering replacement. So those are the 4 considerations. So then in summary, 3 phases of migration. First was interoperability. SAS has this covered end-to-end. All our version 9 clients that deal with SAS programming and SAS program generation communicate directly with CAD servers. Got that one covered. Just need to learn to stand up a Viya environment and leverage it. Second is content promotion. SAS has a similar approach to what we've done from version 9 to version 9 as with version 9 to Viya in packaging up my user collateral and exporting it and then importing it on the Viya side. And then the third is the considerations associated with replacement. I've now got all my business value on the Viya side. I'm ready to turn off version 9, and I have to consider the considerations which I enumerated earlier. Now, there's a great deal of detail which I wasn't able to cover in this brief video, which are described in the Global Forum paper. A shout out to Susan Pearsall, who co-authored this particular paper with me. You'll find a lot more information on the mechanics behind, especially content promotion, both in the paper as well as the references that it cites to SAS documentation. So I appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your virtual conference.